my teacher and I had agreed on my moving from Los Angeles to New York to start Zen Community in New York in 1978. And I actually moved in the end of 79, December 1979. And one of my favorite services, that liturgical services that we chanted at Zen Center Los Angeles, was the Kanromon, which translates into Gate of Sweet Nectar. And we had chanted it always in Japanese. That's a mixture, Japanese, Sanskrit. And I didn't know of any English translation at the time. There was a English translation of a text, the same service, but very abbreviated, that was used in the Rinzai tradition. And that appeared in a book by D.T. Suzuki, Manual of Zen Buddhism. But it's very short. That particular service was embellished quite a bit by a Japanese Soto teacher in the 1700s, I guess. And but there was no English translation of that. So I asked my teacher if he would spend time with me to translate that. And we went word by word through the text. And he gave me a word by word translation and the various possibilities of translation. And the sense, we worked on what's the sense of each line, the feeling of each line. And from that I created a translation prior to moving to New York. In New York, I was working with, one of my students was a great writer, novelist, Peter Matheson, with beautiful command of the language. My command of the English language is not so great. I'm from Brooklyn. I have great command of Brooklyn, but not Brooklynese, but not English. So I then worked with him to go over the text as I had translated it to try to make it sing better and feel better. And we made some changes that way. And then I started to use it at the Zen Community in New York as a very standard text in liturgy. And through the years, I kept changing it. I had a discussion with my teacher who said that in Japan, the Japanese Soto version that came from the earlier version that dates back to Shakyamuni Buddha, that was changed tremendously, bringing into it Shingon aspects, a lot of imagination and creativity. And my teacher said this is a new era, and it's he saw that I had a real affinity for the text. He said, feel free to change it in any way. So after that, I started to make some other radical changes of bringing in text from other religions and other sensitivities, and stopped calling it a translation. So then it became the Gate of Sweet Nectar, as used in the Zen Peacemaker community. And I don't like, or I feel it's inaccurate to say it's a translation of Kanroma, because I've made so many shifts. Yeah.
So I'm interested in knowing, when you're making these shifts, maybe you probably don't have a standard set of criteria of, what's okay to add and what's not okay, and how much you can change this and how much you can't. But since you sort of had free will to do whatever you want with it, how did you go about sort of making sure that you maintain the integrity of the service while still bringing in those things that you wanted to bring
in? The basic point of the service dates back in the days of Shakyamuni Buddha to a service for people that were in hells. And then as the years go on, the service takes the flavor of being a liturgy for people that are suffering, for people who have been forgotten, for people who nobody's doing services. And it could be because they've gone off to a faraway war and people lose track of them, and they may have died in that war, and nobody knows they've died, and there's nobody doing services. So for many reasons, there are people for whom liturgical services should be done but aren't being done, and the service takes on that flavor for all of those. And in particular, it's very important in Japan as a service for the ancestors. And I took that flavor, what sort of grabbed me, because I was very interested in social action, was looking at the aspects of society that have been forgotten or on purpose neglected, and then looking at individuals and at the aspects of individuals that have been forgotten or on purpose neglected, and said I would like that service to be for them. So the spirit of the service is what I was interested in, and I felt free to change everything else as long as I kept the spirit of the service. This ritual, the gate of sweet nectar, is the metaphor is the feeding of hungry spirits, hungry ghosts. I had an experience, maybe in 1977, prior to translation of the Gate of Sweet Nectar. I had an experience in which I experienced the hungry spirits of the world. And the hunger was experienced the unsatisfaction, the desire for something, whether it was food, money, wealth, fame. That's the hunger of the hungry spirits. I experienced that in an overwhelming way. And I made a vow that I would try to feed all those hungry spirits. And they weren't just Buddhists, this was the hungry spirits of the world. And they weren't necessarily Catholics or Jews, or they were just the hungry spirits. So that's led me to work in multi-faith work, interfaith work, but more than that into what I call building a house of one people. And I've been working in one people events ever since that time. My vow was how to bring what I had realized through my Zen studies, that is the interconnectedness of life and the oneness of life, how to bring that awareness and realization and actualization to everyone in all aspects of life, not just whether they go to a Zen temple to sit or whether they call themselves Buddhists or Christians or Jews or atheists or agnostics, but to everyone. And that's informed my whole practice, everything I've done since that time, which, like I say, 77, 78. And when I worked on the Gate of Sweet Nectar, I had that in the back of my head. So obviously, when we first look at the service, we look at it as a Buddhist service. And I was saying, okay, how do I make this service a service that feels comfortable to people in different religions? And then also, how do I make this service comfortable to people who aren't religious, who claim not to be religious, who feel they're atheists or agnostics or whatever? How do I make it open to everyone? I'm still exploring that. I'm still looking at changes that will enlarge the audience of the Gate of Sweet Nectar without losing the audience that has come to it because it's a Buddhist liturgy, or because I brought Jewish aspects into it, or Christian aspects, or other types of Buddhist aspects besides Zen. In the Theravadan tradition, there's a beautiful type of meditation that's called metta meditation, or love meditation. It's expanding your love to oneself, to one's enemies, to the whole world. And that, for me, was independent of any religion. The theme of love goes through everything, whether it's religious or not. And so I brought metta meditation directly into the Gate of Sweet Nectar. In the Jewish tradition, the most important prayer is called the Shema Yisrael. It literally means "Listen, O Israel," or "Be attentive, O Israel." And it's said that Christ on the cross said the Shema as he was dying. It's supposed to be repeated by every Jew about 7 times a day. And I used elements from that, which is, that prayer is asking everyone to really be attentive to the oneness of life. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. That's the Hebrew. Shema. Listen, Israel. Israel is, in Buddhist language, that word is used for Sangha, community, world. Listen. Adonai Eloheinu. The absolute is the relative. Adonai is one of the names of God. There are many names of God in Judaism, in Christianity, in Hinduism. And Adonai is one, and it represents the absoluteness of God. Eloheinu is another name of God, and it represents the relative, the forms, the myriad forms of life, myriad forms of God. Adonai Eloheinu, the absolute is the relative. Adonai Echad, the absolute is one. Echad is one. So that prayer is asking us all to really grasp the oneness of life and the interconnectedness of life. So I brought that into this service. In Christianity, Mass plays such an important role, the body of Christ, blood of Christ. And part of the Gate of Sweet Nectar is the feeding of all hungry spirits. So I made that into a Mass, and that becomes the Buddhist Mass. So I took those elements to try to help people be more comfortable, no matter what tradition they came from, with the service. And I've changed certain words to make them more understandable to everybody. And there is some that is still that are very Buddhist, and I've been playing with those particular words. How far can I go in changing things, taking away the Buddhist flavor to make it a universal flavor, versus keeping flavors of different faiths in it? It's an ongoing work for me. No, I actually took the words. Okay. I took words out. When I brought the elements from the different traditions into the service, I took the words from the prayer, from the Shema Yisrael, words that appear in that prayer, and I brought them in places where the same spirit was being, where the same spirit was appearing in different words. So I would just take away the Buddhist words or the Buddhist terms and bring in the Hebrew lines or the Theravadan lines or the Christian lines, but not changing the spirit. So if there was a place where it was, there is a place in the original text of the Kanroman where it asks you to make these vows with all your heart, with all your strength, to put everything you have into those prayers. Well, in the Shema Yisrael, there's a place that says, with all your essence, with all your love, put yourself into this prayer. So I used the terminology so that if you were Jewish and you read that line, if you were Jewish and understood the liturgy of Judaism, if you knew the translation of the Hebrew, you would recognize that this is from the Shema Yisrael. And many rabbis have told me that. He says, "Oh, you've taken the Shema Yisrael," and the same with other traditions. If you were Theravadan, you would recognize the metta meditation. It just stands right out. And if you're not, you wouldn't, because you didn't know it anyway. In the Gita Sweet Nectar, there's a few very important elements. There's the themes of feeding the hungry spirits. But first you have to bring them here. And one of the ways you have to bring them all here is for you as the participant of the service to connect with all of the aspects of life. So one of the early parts of the liturgy is really inviting the participants to become one with the universe, thereby bringing the spirits. Now they're hungry. So the other parts of the service that are very important is to feed them. And we want to feed them the mind of compassion, but we also want to feed them food, because if your body is starving, you need some food first before you can deal with the heart and the mind. So we actually do feed. And then we give some teachings, and then we ask that we recognize everyone and every aspect of ourselves and of life as the Buddhas. These are the important pieces. The part of feeding is very similar to Catholic Mass, and therefore I call it a Buddhist Mass, or Buddhist communion. And there's a couple of elements of that part. One is that since we have all of the hungry spirits here, we have to have a lot of food. And so there's the part of taking the food that's on the altar and magnifying it to where it is it is large enough to feed everyone. It's very similar to the sacrament and the wafers and the wine. They're there to represent the body and blood of the eternal Christ, huge, and enough has to be there to feed all of the people that are attending that particular Mass, but others that are invisible. In a traditional service, the food is for all of the hungry spirits that have come. As I look at the service, I look at also each of the people that are physically there as also being hungry spirits, having elements of themselves that are unsatisfied, or that they're dealing with issues and stuff. What I've only done a few times, but I'm moving towards this being a regular part of the service, is that after feeding all of the hungry spirits that have been invited into the service, that all of the people that are physically there would come up and receive the food. And that would bring it closer to the appearance of the Catholic Mass. Right now, when we look at the Catholic Mass, you focus on the people that are there receiving communion, and then there are aspects that aren't there, that the priest is dealing with. And in this Gate of Sweet Nectar, when you look at it, your focus is on all of the hungry spirits that we don't see receiving the communion, and the participants sort of watching. But for me, that's a dichotomy. The participants are as hungry as spirits we don't see. So that, as I say, it's an element that I've done sometimes, but haven't made it as a standard part of the liturgy. But it will be at one point,
Okay.
soon.
Um,
Yeah, there's nothing that I'm involved in that doesn't change a lot, and the service is one of them. I have, from the very beginning, I had various thoughts of what I wanted to do with the service. From the very beginning, I was looking at a 3-month practice that involved the service. The service is divided basically into 5 different parts. And I was looking at those parts being a week, 2 weeks, a month long. So the first part, in which we're becoming one with the various bodies of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, that's not so simple to do just standing there in the service. And in Zen we have a practice called sesshin, unification of mind, a retreat in which we try to become one. So that's very natural to do this first part of the service as a retreat in which one is concentrating on becoming Buddha and Bodhisattvas and Lotus Sutra and Jesus and various elements. There's a part that has to do with the 5 Buddha families, and those, that's very intricate. It's a mandala, it's creation of a mandala, it's creation of different forms, and that could be a whole month in order to create the mandala. Many Tibetan practices are based around that, of creating a mandala, entering the mandala, doing practices within the mandala, and then having an abhisheka, final ceremony, and then taking apart the mandala. So I've looked at this Gated Sweet Nectar as going into a 3-month practice of that form. One of my students, a woman, she's an abbot of the Zen Center of Los Angeles and conducts this service all the time. She's creating a play based on this Gated Sweet Nectar. And that will be a play that we hold here annually also. And then the wording itself, and I've talked with a friend of mine, is a wonderful musician, Paul Winters, and I've talked to him about taking this text and making a mass out of it, an earth mass. Not an earth mass, he's done an earth mass, a street mass. Because this service is, for me, a service that I use in street retreats, and students of mine, when they do street retreats, use this service. So I've talked with Paul about taking this and creating a mass for the streets, a street mass. I'm hoping to premiere that in our House of One People. So yeah, I have lots of plans for this particular liturgy, from changing the words, to making a play of it, to making a 3-month practice, to making a symphony.
All right. Let's see. Since we're including interviews with both Dagu and Wendy Yoku in this video, I was wondering if you might just speak a little bit briefly specifically about how you use this ritual as a teaching device, because you've also studied a lot, and when you were doing your study, you used it as a main focus, and as sort of a teaching and learning tool. I wonder if you could talk a little more about that.
Yeah, the Gated Sweet Nectar has 5 distinct parts to it, and each part has a different flavor. And within each part, the lines have different flavors and meanings and essences. So I decided many years ago to start to use that as a study vehicle with students of mine. And the basic way we did it is in the form of koan study. where I would ask the student to go line by line and express the essence of the line in a non-dual way. And then we would talk about it. And to find the important words of each line. There's only a few students that have finished the whole text that way. But I've found that by doing so, you can parallel the koan study as developed by Hakuin Zenji in Japan. Yeah, I've found that the study of the Gate of Sweet Nectar, line by line, it done in a koan study way, and then expounding more about it. I found that it can replace a lot of, for me, it replaces, I have replaced a lot of traditional koan study with the study of the Gate of Sweet Nectar. I've added on to that study certain other elements, the study of the precepts, study of relationship between absolute and relative, some other aspects. But the Gate of Sweet Nectar has enough meat in it and deals with so many aspects of our life and study and practice that it becomes a beautiful way to study. And I have used that with many of my students. My understanding of life that has influenced by my study of Zen is that this is one interconnected body. So if I just look at my own body for a second, the parts of my body that are suffering or that are in need call one's attention immediately. So it'd be very hard to imagine that you could walk around being physically hungry and not looking for something to eat, or being thirsty and not looking for something to drink, or if your hand starts to bleed, not looking for a Band-Aid or to something to take care of it. If one experiences the interconnectedness of life, the oneness of life, then the sufferings of life are calling out to be dealt with. That's what the Gate of Sweet Nectar is. And that's been my calling since 77, 78. That is, when I experienced the hungry spirits of the world, I knew that they were me. But I experienced it in a way which said, how do I take care of it? So that it's the same question, it's a mundane question in a way. If I'm hungry, internally I might be saying, how do I take care of the fact that I'm hungry? Where's the nearest food store? Where's the nearest refrigerator? If there isn't one, if I'm lost in the woods, which food is edible, which isn't edible? That is, it's immediate. It comes up as, how do I take care of the hunger that's there? So for me, Zen is very simple. I just feel when I go places, I feel the sufferings, the hungers. They're my sufferings. And I'm trying to figure out what to do. I also know that I can't just leave it as a mental construct, what to do. I take all the ingredients I have and I do something. Just as if I'm hungry, I can't just, if this body is hungry, I can't just leave it at the mental thing. Oh, it's hunger. I see. That's because you haven't eaten for so long, and figure out all the reasons why you're hungry and not worry about the actual food to bring to the mouth. I can't leave it at just that mental thing, and nobody does. They have to get some food into their mouth. So that's the metaphor, and it's rather simple. It's just that's what drives me, and the service is all about that. So that's influenced everything I do. When I worked in Yonkers and Grayston, I looked at all of the hungers and sufferings that were in the community, and it was AIDS, it was homelessness, it was It was people without jobs. It was people without childcare. There were all kinds of issues. So I worked on doing something about it. And the Gate of Sweet Nectar was the service that sort of celebrated that work. When I first started to work at Graceton, I realized that when I was much younger, I had made a few vows, and one of them was to live in the streets. And working in Yonkers, I was going to work with the homeless, so I felt, well, this is the time. I'd forgotten about that vow. And I said, this is the time to do that, so I wanted to go live in the streets. And I brought some people with me. And each day, we would gather and sit together and talk about what was going on with us. And then we'd disperse into little groups, beg for money, beg for food, and then come back. And during one of the times when we were sitting together, somebody said, I think we have to thank all the Buddhas for what's going on. And then somebody else said, yeah, but it's not just all the Buddhas. We have to thank all of the beings for what's going on. Well, those are two lines out of the Gate of Sweet Nectar. And then other people, they didn't know the Gate of Sweet Nectar. Other people said things that were exact lines out of the Gate of Sweet Nectar. And so I realized that the Gate of Sweet Nectar was also the liturgy that had to be used on the streets. And when I came back home, it struck me that my life was living out the Gate of Sweet Nectar. And I therefore realized that that was my theme song. It was just all about my life. And it's remained my theme song.